It is said that being born and dying, even though they are natural for us, are the hardest things to confront. And it was not easy for Carlo to be born either. My pregnancy went smoothly, but at his birth, Carlo gave me lots to deal with. At around 5:00 p.m. on Thursday, May 2nd, 1991, my husband and I decided to go right away to the Portland clinic. I gave birth on Friday, May 3rd at 11:45 a.m., just 18 hours later. On that spring day in London, when I brought my firstborn into the world, the Portland clinic, as was their custom, sent Carlo's birth announcement to the Times, which I have kept until today. I would never have thought that that newspaper, which is very secular, would have written about Carlo, not only at his birth, but also multiple times after his death. I have already made a detailed video about Carlo's short life, which you can watch here, but this video will be focused on his mother and her journey back to her faith because of her son, Carlo. Carlo's mother, Antonia Salzano, was a cradle Catholic, but had only been to church twice in her life, once when she made her first Holy Communion, and again when she got married. As a girl, she went to a Catholic school, but this, she said, was merely for convenience, as it was the only school nearby. Antonia said that when it came to her faith, she had more of the mindset of a Protestant than a Catholic, because she didn't believe that Jesus was truly in the Eucharist and thought that it was merely a symbol of the Last Supper. It is not that we had anything against the faith, Antonia said, referring to both herself and her husband. We were just used to living without it. And so, how did this lapsed Catholic mother happen to bring up a son so holy that he became a saint? Antonia would tell you herself that Carlo's great sanctity and sainthood had nothing to do with her, but that he was a gift from God, not just for her, but for the whole world, as all the saints who are raised to the altar are gifts to us. She has attested many times that Carlo saved her. It was through Carlo that she came back to the church. How does this happen that a child leads the parent back to God when the child is brought up in a household that has nothing to do with God and no spiritual upbringing? It's impossible. And yet, nothing is impossible with God. Carlo was born to his parents, Andrea and Antonia, in London, England, on May 3rd, 1991. Even though neither parent was religious, they had Carlo baptized a few weeks after his birth. Antonia describes Carlo as full of the Holy Spirit from the very beginning. Even as young as 3 years old, Carlo was curious about Jesus and Mary and the saints. He would ask his mother about them, and embarrassed at her own ignorance, Antonia had to admit that she couldn't answer his questions. To satisfy his insistent curiosity, she would take him to Catholic churches, where he would gaze at the stained glass windows, the beautiful architecture, and the symbolism of the Catholic faith. But Antonia had not yet felt the need to return to the faith. She was only trying to satisfy the curiosity of her young son. It was not until Carlo's grandfather suddenly died from a heart attack that things took a drastic turn in Antonia's life. Although the shock of a sudden death was sobering and disturbing, this is not what caught Antonia's attention. It was when Carlo approached his mother and told her that his grandfather had appeared to him and told him that he was in purgatory and that he needed a mass said for him. Antonia had not taught Carlo about purgatory or about offering masses for the dead. She herself had very little understanding about purgatory. And yet, when Carlo insisted that his grandfather needed a mass said for his soul, she was flabbergasted. After making arrangements to have a mass said for his grandfather, she immediately went to confession. Here, a holy priest who had the gift of reading souls told Antonia that she had a very holy son who had a great mission for the church. He was also able to tell her all of her sins. Shortly after this, Antonia began to attend Mass on a regular basis, along with her husband and Carlo. Upon the advice of the holy priest, she also began to read the Catechism and learn about the Catholic faith. Initially, this was to save herself from the embarrassment of her ignorance to Carlo's questions, some of them very deep. But eventually, it became about her own need to know about her faith, which eventually led to a deep love. And yet, Carlo was going to bring Antonia even deeper. When he was 7 years old, he received his first communion, and shortly after, he began to request to go to daily Mass. Again, Antonia complied with his wishes, and eventually his need for the Holy Eucharist became her need. If she wasn't able to bring him because of her work, someone else in the family would bring him. They also began to go to daily adoration together. Here, Carlo grew even closer to God. God taught Carlo in a way that Antonia could not even the holiest priest. Jesus himself taught Carlo how to love him and how to love others. Even as a little child, as children tend to be self-absorbed, Carlo was not. His nanny felt that he was too timid, and when she saw how the other little children took advantage of him, she would tell him to retaliate and get back at them. But Carlo would say, "Jesus wouldn't like it if I was mean." Carlo was holy, Antonia said, but he was also a normal boy. He liked hanging out with his friends, riding bikes, and playing video games. But he understood by watching other kids how easy it was to get sucked in and waste time on the computer. He also saw with concern how the games made his friends more competitive and cranky with each other. Carlo had received a PlayStation when he was 8 years old, and he made a rule for himself to limit screen time to just 1 hour a week. This meant he would play on the PlayStation for only 10 minutes a day. This might seem nearly impossible to most kids these days, but for Carlo it was easy because he spent most of his time outside, playing with the neighborhood kids, or making short stories with his video camera, or spending time in front of the Blessed Sacrament, which he did daily. Antonia says that Carlo was very self-disciplined in all areas, not just computer time. He never allowed his eyes to roam or to look at anything impure. He also had great control over his emotions. The only times he got angry was when a friend would say or do something impure. His anger was not in judgment, but in deep concern for his friends' souls, as well as the sins against purity. One time, he was at a community pool with his mother when she saw him look at something that made him angry. He walked over to the lifeguard and gestured at a teenage couple who were kissing while little kids were watching. The lifeguard walked over and made them stop. It might be hard to believe that a teenager never complained, but this is because Carlo felt he never had anything to complain about. Coming from a wealthy family, Carlo knew that he was blessed with a roof over his head, plenty to eat, and a family that loved him. But, his mother said, it bothered him to see so many homeless people have nothing. For this reason, he never let Antonia buy any expensive clothes for him, and nothing name brand. If she tried, he would give the same argument, that it wasn't right for him to have more than he needed when so many people did not. Sometimes Carlo was teased at school for his lack of fashion choices, but he didn't care, because he knew that his parents' money was being used for better things. Although Antonia was not a heavy spender, one day while they were shopping, she wanted to buy herself some perfume that was 50 euros. Carlo said to her, "Why waste your money on something so frivolous? This could be used for the poor." He used his own money to buy the poor sleeping bags, which he would distribute to those sleeping outside the church or under bridges. Antonia got to enjoy 15 years with her son, but Carlo had always predicted that he would die young. In fact, even when he was very little, he would tell his mother that he would die of a broken vein in his brain. That is exactly how he died, of a cerebral hemorrhage. When their housekeeper and good friend, Rajesh, also one of Carlo's converts, joked about his hair going gray, Carlo would also joke, "I will always be young." At the time, no one took these things that he said seriously. He was young, vibrant, and in good health. It was only in looking back after his death that all these little remarks suddenly made sense. Before we talk about Carlo's death and Antonia's response to it, we need to talk about his computers catching on fire. This happened 5 times. Carlo loved using the internet to inspire people. He wanted to make multiple websites of the saints to tell their stories, but the biggest website he made was of the Eucharistic miracles. And yet throughout this work, one by one, his computers would suddenly start on fire. There was never any reason for the computers suddenly starting on fire. It certainly wasn't from overuse, as Carlo only spent short amounts of time working on the website every day. The only thing that made sense to Carlo was that the devil was not happy with the work he was doing and wanted to destroy it. But if the devil hoped to discourage Carlo, it didn't work. Antonia said that Carlo would only laugh. He considered the website to be God's work, and he could do with it what he wanted. The weeks before Carlo died, Antonia remembers it being a peaceful time. The weather was beautiful and luminous, she said. Carlo didn't start school until mid-September, and Antonia said that there was a certain lightheartedness in the air. They spent these weeks in the park, eating picnic lunches and watching the dogs play. After the first day of school, Carlo came home tired. His gym teacher had the class run laps around the soccer field, and they thought his tiredness was just from that. It also didn't stop him from going on a walk with the dogs and his mother. The day after, he began to run a slight fever of 100.4 with a sore throat. Again, Antonia wasn't concerned because Carlo had told her that half of his class had been out with the flu. She called the doctor as a precaution, and the doctor put Carlo on a prescription to be on the safe side, but no one was overly concerned. Carlo's fever and fluish symptoms continued the rest of the week, but he continued to be up and around as usual. One day, as his parents visited with him while he ate supper in bed, he surprised them by saying, "I'm offering up all my sufferings for the Pope's intentions, and so that he doesn't go to purgatory after he dies." Carlo's parents laughed, thinking that Carlo was joking, because things didn't seem that serious, and he hadn't complained of any pain. As Carlo often struggled with night terrors as a child, and especially when he was sick, Antonia slept in his room during those nights when he was sick. On one of those nights, as she slept on the floor by his bed, Antonia had a dream that she was in a church with St. Francis of Assisi, one of Carlo's favorite saints. In her dream, Antonia looked up to the ceiling of the church, where she saw Carlo's face very large. St. Francis told her that Carlo would become very important in the church. Antonia later said that although she pondered what the dream meant, she had only thought that it meant that Carlo would one day become a priest. The next night, as she again laid by Carlo's bed, she was falling asleep saying the rosary when she distinctly heard a voice say, "Carlo will die." This voice sounded sinister, and Antonia felt that it was the devil trying to scare her, so she purposely put it out of her mind. When Carlo awoke the next morning, he told Antonia that he had to go to the bathroom, but he was too weak to move. It took both Antonia and her husband to get Carlo into the bathroom. Alarmed, they called the doctor, who told them to come in right away. Carlo was so weak that they used an office chair to wheel him out to the car. The doctor sent them to pediatric hematology, and it was determined that Carlo had type M3 leukemia, a very serious and deadly form of cancer that gives no symptoms until it's too late. The doctor very seriously delivered the news and told them that Carlo needed to begin treatment right away. Antonia wrote, "When the doctor left us, Carlo was able to stay calm. I remember that he gave us a big smile and said, 'God has given me a wake-up call.' I was very struck by his attitude and by his ability to look at his situation with positivity and serenity, regardless of the circumstances. The memory of that luminous smile he gave us still comes to mind today. It was like when someone walks into a dark room and suddenly turns on the light. He lit up our darkest hour, the shock of upsetting news. He did not waste words worrying. He did not allow anxiety or anguish to conquer him. He reacted by trusting in God." Carlo entered one hospital only to be transferred to another. Here, he amazed everyone by remaining serene and calm with a smile on his face. When asked if he was suffering much, he would only answer with a smile that others were suffering more than him. This astonished the doctors and nurses, as they knew how painful the aggressive form of cancer he had could be. Carlo wasn't afraid to die, as he had said so many times during his life. The only thing he was afraid of was sin, because this separates us from God. And so for this reason, because he was confident that he had never lived a moment of his life that was displeasing to God. Antonia looked to her son for inspiration. She swung between hope and fear. Knowing that Carlo was offering his sufferings for the Pope and for the Church, she offered her own sufferings for the conversion of sinners, for people to come back to the Eucharist, and especially for the conversion of the Jewish people. Carlo had told his parents that he wouldn't be coming home from the hospital alive, but that he would send them signs from heaven. Still, they held out hope for a miracle. After a procedure of separating his red blood cells from the white blood cells, Carlo told his mother that he had a headache and that he would like to rest. He fell asleep with a smile on his face and never woke up again. He had fallen into a coma, and as he predicted when he was a little boy, he died of a cerebral hemorrhage. He was declared brain dead. Antonia writes, "I felt like I was living in a dream. In some way, it all seemed inconceivable. Carlo had left us so quickly. Was it possible that it had happened? There was little to say. Carlo was no longer here. This was the reality. The Lord took him away at just 15, at the height of his youth, at the peak of his energy, full of joy and splendor." The doctor sent his parents home and told them they would call them when Carlo's heart stopped beating on its own. The next morning, October 12th, at 6:45 a.m., the doctor called to let them know that his heart had stopped. Devastated, Antonia went to the next room where her mother was staying to tell her the news. Her mother replied, "Yes, I already know, because I heard Carlo's voice that said, 'Grandma, I am in heaven with the angels. I'm very happy. Don't cry, because I will always be there beside you.'" It was arranged to have Carlo's body brought back to his home so that others could say goodbye. Soon, the house was filled with family, friends, and strangers. But not strangers to Carlo. These were the people he talked to: the homeless, the workers, the employees, the forgotten. Antonia was amazed, and yet she wasn't surprised. The separation of death hurt Antonia, but as she said, she was prepared because she had already done her path, the path that Carlo led her back to the faith. One morning, not too long after his death, Antonia woke up with a start. She had heard the words "testament" repeated over and over in a dream. She knew interiorly that this was Carlo prompting her to do something. Excitedly, she ran to his room to see what she would find as a testimony to his life, but she found nothing. On impulse, she opened his computer and found a video file. Clicking on it, she found a short video of Carlo that he had recorded of himself 2 months before he died. In the recording, he said, "I've put on 70 kilograms and am destined to die." Then he looked up toward heaven and smiled happily. There were other signs that Carlo sent his mother. One time when she was in church, she wondered if Carlo was truly in heaven. Suddenly she heard an interior voice say, "Carlo is in heaven, and this is enough for you." In addition to this comfort, she heard from 3 different priests who lived abroad who had been praying to Carlo that each one of them had a dream with the same message, that Carlo had gone straight to heaven without passing through purgatory. And then there's the most exciting dream of all, when Carlo appeared in a dream to his mother and told her that he would be first beatified and then canonized. A dream that is becoming a reality on April 27th. Carlo showed me how to spend my days in the light of eternity. He taught me always to look toward heaven, toward the absolute, and not bent down toward the temporary, the relative. Day by day, he helped me glimpse a way to leave the relative and become a pilgrim of the absolute, which is a synonym for the supernatural and also for grace. And grace is nothing other than the recognition of this absolute.